Hey, I'm Max and welcome to part 2 of this tutorial. In this part we will add spikes on the road that the player can hit and get destroyed. And by the way, I just wanted to show before we start this part, this is the bug that happened with my mesh. And that's what happens when you make your mesh in like 5 minutes. Okay, so first off we want to add spikes on the road that randomly spawns and that when the player hits it, he dies. So first I will drag in my spikes cylinder mesh. Then I will add component and add a capsule collider. So my capsule collider right now is pretty good, but I think I will reduce a little bit the size because I don't want the player to feel like he hit something when he didn't. So usually games, they make the colliders a little bit smaller, so if you slightly hit it, you actually don't hit it because the opposite feels very bad to the player. So you can see here my collider is not in the right direction. So I can simply go in the direction and select Z-axis. So now I can edit it again. So you can see the bottom works fine, this works fine. So you can see with the collider the way I did it, if you hit a little bit of the spikes, you actually don't die. And this is for player satisfaction, most games do this. But if you want, you can make it slightly bigger on each side. Now I will also add a tag to my spikes because I want to tag every object that when you collide with it, the player dies. So I will click here tag, add a tag, then in the tags I will click plus and create one, let's say def, and then go back on my spikes and select that def tag. So every object with that tag, when you touch it, you will die. Now I will save this spike cylinder as a prefab so I can spawn it from my script, original prefab, and then I can delete it from my map. Now I will open back my road script. And in my road script at the top, I will add a public game object and I will add spikes prefab. It's important to put it public because we will put it in the scripts component. So now every time a road teleports back to the end, we want to remove all of the spikes and things that are on it and then spawn new ones so it looks like a new part of the road just appeared. So to remove all of the child, we will do for int I equals 0. I is smaller than transform.child count I++, and then we simply destroy each child. So destroy transform.getChild at position I like this. So this will make sure that there are no things attached to the road anymore. And then we want to spawn new things and attach them to the road so it looks like a new one. So in my case, what I'll do is random.range and then I'll put, let's say 0 and 100, so it will give me a random value between 0 and 100. I'll save it in a float chance, and then I'll add a chance to spawn a spike. So I'll do, for example, if chance is less than 50, so if you put, for example, 20, then it's going to be 20% chance. So here I'll put 50% chance. So 50% chance of spawning a spike. So we have our spike saved as a spike prefab. So I'll do instantiate, then put our spikes prefab. So here we could put the transform to set the parent, but it might cause some scale issues and also some position issues. So in my case, I prefer to put the position. So I'll do transform.position plus new vector tree. And in my vector tree, I will offset randomly on the z-axis. So it will create a spikes that will be anywhere on this axis right here. Let's say from -7 to 7. So here I'll do random.range -7 f7f, then 0 0. And then finally I have to put in the rotation, so I'll just do quaternon.identity, so no rotation. Then I have to set this spike as a child of the road so it follows the road's movement. So I will simply do spike.transform.setParent and then do transform for this road's transform. Now if I try to play this, you can see if I go on my road, the spike prefab is not set. So I will go in my prefab for my road and then drag in your spike cylinder prefab and save to make sure it's applied to all of the prefabs. So now all of my roads have the prefab set in their script. So now if I play, they should be able to spawn cylinders. Oh, you can see my cylinder just spawned here. Let's see if this one spawns one. No, so it's 50% chance. But you can see the angle is not right, it's flat on the ground, so we need to fix that. Now let's see if when the road reaches the end, it deletes it. So you can see it now has 2, so clearly it didn't delete it. And in the console we get If you want to destroy the game object, please call destroy on the game object instead. So what this means is here when we do destroy get child, we need to do dot game object. You cannot destroy a transform, you have to destroy the game object of the transform. And also here quaternon.identity clearly doesn't give us the rotation we want, because in the prefab you can see it has a rotation of -90 on the X. That's like their default rotation. It's probably because I didn't export my mesh correctly, but it doesn't matter. I can simply go here and instead of .identity I put .euler, and then inside of here type -90f 0f 0f, and it will add that rotation as the default. So now if I hit play, they should get destroyed correctly and also have the right rotation. So let's see. So you can see now it has the right rotation, it is standing up just like we want it, and it's following the road because we set it as the parent. Now let's see if it gets deleted once it reaches the end. So it's to the left and now there's none, so clearly it got deleted. That's good, but now you can see if I move this part right here so it's facing the player, you can see when the player goes through it, it will not die. You can see it just went through it and it didn't die. To make it so the player dies when he touches the spikes, we will first go on our player object right here, and we will add a capsule collider to it. Then we just have to shape the capsule collider to the shape that we want. Then we want to go on our prefab for our spikes and set the capsule collider is trigger to true. And the reason we do that is because if we have a cylinder that's moving towards the player and hits it, we don't want it to push the player back, because if it does, then the player will fly off camera. So to make sure that the player doesn't get hit back, we set the capsule collider of the spikes to is trigger, which means when we hit the spikes, it will trigger something in the code, but it will not actually push back the player, which is fine because anyway the player will get destroyed. So make sure you set your capsule collider is trigger to true on your cylinder and save. Then you can go in your scripts folder and create a new C# script and call it player script. In this player script, we will simply do at the bottom right here, void on trigger enter. So this will be triggered when we hit a trigger like our spike cylinder, and we will do if other.tag.contains def. So remember we put a def tag on our spike cylinder. So if the object we collided with has the def tag, then we want to destroy the game object, which is going to be the player. So now if I hit play, you can see there's a bug that makes the road have gaps in it. And the reason for that is because our player is colliding with the road, so preventing the road from moving. To fix this, we can simply go on our player and set the capsule collider to is trigger as well. Since we don't actually need any real collision with the player, only to know when it's touching something, we don't need to have a real collider, we can just set it to trigger. So now if we save this with both the spikes and the player as trigger, there should be no collisions with the road, and when the spike spawn and touches, we should die. We can't actually control the player yet, so I'm just going to move the spikes in our way, so we will see if it works, and let's see if it works, and no. And that's because I forgot to add my player script component to my player object. So on the player, add the player script that we just made, and that will make it die when it touches a spike. And let's see if it works. When I touch it, I get destroyed. Now as a nice finishing touch, when the player dies, usually there's a little spray on the ground to show that the player died here. So I just made a quick little spray thing like this. So I'll probably put it in the download as well, or you can use whatever you want. Then you can simply create a new material right here, material, call it for example decal or spray decal. Then you want to click at the top under shader, go into shader graphs and then decal, put as your base map your picture. Then you can create an empty game object, call it for example a spray, put on it a decal projector, then drag it up to the surface just to test it, and then set your material here to the one you just made, so the spray decal for me. Now you can see it doesn't show up and it says no renderer has a decal feature added. So for this you just go in your assets, then go into your settings, and then whichever mode you use, you just have to add a decal renderer. So first the URP balance renderer, I can just add renderer feature and add decal. Then if you need to use, for example, the eye fidelity, then you can add Decal 2. So it seems like in my project, that's what I use. And then the performance renderer, you can add Decal 2. So if all of your renderers have decals, then your decal renderer should work. So you can see now it appeared. And you can see the texture is stretched because it's not in the right orientation. So if I rotate it like this, then maybe move it down a little bit, you can see that it's kind of weird around the spray. You can see that the alpha doesn't work well. You can set the normal blend to 0 and this should fix it. And even if you have two, one on top of the other, it should work fine. So now that we have our decal, we can simply set it as a prefab. So just drag it in as a prefab and then delete it from your road. And then we will go in the player script, add a public game object, def prefab or decal prefab, whatever you want to call it. And when you die, you just want to do before instantiate or prefab, add the transform.position and with no rotation. So to do no rotation, you just do .identity. So like this, it should spawn a prefab where you die. And then we just need to attach it to the road. So you can find the closest road to where the player is. So probably the one that's closest to the camera too. Or even more simple than that, you can simply get your game object for the decal equals to this. And then do decal.transform.setParent and set it to the parent of the one you just collided with. Because the one you just collided with will be at the same location or almost. So this will clearly be the right road. So if you hit the spikes, then you spawn a decal on the ground and set the parent to the parent of the spikes, which will be the road you're on. So now I just need to set the def prefab on my player script. So prefab spray and I drag it here. So it will spawn it like this, a spray on the ground. So you can see when I die, it spawns a spray and then it gets deleted when it reaches the end, just like everything else. But you could see probably that my spray was not in the right rotation, just like the spikes earlier. And also when you spawn the spray, they spawn sort of on the surface like this. So they might be a bit glitchy. You need to pull them down a little bit to make sure that they're fine. So what I'll do here is transform.position minus new vector 0, 0, and then let's say 0.5. So this will spawn it instead of like this, around like this. So this actually might be a bit much, so I'll do like 0.3 to be sure. So just a little bit should be okay, 0.3. And then for the rotation, we actually want to use the same one we did in the prefab, which is, in my case, minus 90x. So I'll just do minus 90, 0, 0. So now if I save this, they should now spawn with the right rotation and a little bit down to make sure they display correctly. So let's see if this works. Now when the player dies, there should be a decal on the ground. So let's see it. Oh, there it is. There it is. Oh, it's gone. I'll try to move the player a bit forward so we can see it longer. So if I move the player right here and get him to die, we should be able to see the spray. There it is. So it looks fine to me. It kind of looks glitchy on the cylinder. You can try to adjust the height of your decal. So here, let's say we put it at minus 0.3, like when we spawn it. So here the projection depth, if we change it to, let's say 0.1, then we can check for a new location. So let's say minus this. So by setting the projection depth to 0.1, it will make sure not to hit the cylinders that's higher. And now we just have to change our position to minus 0.1, because if we keep it to minus 0.3, you can see it will be under. Actually, it looks like it's plus 0.1. So I'll just use the same position as here. So 0.1 above the spawn point and projection depth 0.1 should work. You can kind of mess around and get whatever values you want, but I'll just copy this and set this to a plus, because apparently with a lower height, it's now a plus. So let's see if this looks any better. Obviously you can change the size and whatever you prefer to do in your game. So now I set the new position in my script. Now I go in my prefab and set the new projection depth. I said I used 0.1 now that I tested out. So let's see if this still works. Yep, this is good. So now if my player dies, it should spawn a spray that doesn't go too far up. Okay, there's a spike here. Now let's die. And you can see now it doesn't climb on the cylinder. So if we hit pause, you can see it just barely goes on the edges. so that's good. Hey, I'm Max from the future, and I just realized the next day that for some reason my decals didn't work anymore. So I don't know if it's a mistake I made in this part you're watching or if it's a mistake I made later. But anyway, this is what it looks like now I fixed it. So my projection depth is 0.1. And to fix the bug that I had, I actually had to go in my script and change the 0.1 from the Z to the Y axis. So if your decals don't show up, maybe try changing this. But basically now, if I hit pause, you can see all of my decals are here and they're fine. But before I changed the 0.1 from the Z to the Y, it was spawning a little bit below, so it was invisible. So if your decals are not visible, try pausing your game, going to scene view, and then looking for spray, and checking if they are under or above maybe. But for me, when I use projection depth 0.1, I simply put 0.1 on the Y and it works. So maybe try that. If it doesn't work, pause and try checking the height and changing it in your code. Okay, so we now can spawn obstacles on our road, and we can have our player hit them, die, and spawn a little spray on the ground. So all we have left to do is make the player movement and make the banners so we can increase the player count, and then the game will be pretty much done. So see you in the next part.